Welcome to There is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. I want to thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lyn Gildon of the Gildon Group at Realty Pros. They currently have over 275 star reviews on Zillow, and they are consummate professionals. If you're looking to buy a home or sell your home, you probably should give them a shout. I will put their information in the show notes. All right, so I am working on my third book, and this book is currently about strength training and different things I've learned through the years and different journeys I've gone on with strength training, and then the most important parts of strength training. So as I was going through it, I have a little section in there that I thought would make for a good podcast. And basically it is, let's look at where everybody agrees on some things. Because if we can look at where everybody agrees, there may be a semblance of truth to it. All right. So I'm going to take a few different areas of health and fitness and talk about that. And soon enough, you'll know what I'm talking about. All right. So first, let's look at different styles of working out. There's many, many different styles of working out, but within the gym culture, there tends to be two dramatically different philosophies among people. One philosophy is more is better, and there's a ton of volume done every time a person works out, and volume means the amount of exercise versus the intensity of the exercise. So volume would be the total number of exercises, the days per week, the amount of sets that somebody might do, and in a way, the repetition. So that's like a lot of volume. And then the emphasis is on volume. Those types might say things like, I'm going to work out almost every day. I'm going to do so many exercises per muscle group, and I'm going to do so many sets per muscle group. So when you look at the most high volume people out there, it would look something like this. They're training 6 days per week. They're training 2 different muscle groups basically per day, and they're doing that 2 times per week. And they're doing roughly 20 sets per muscle group. So that's like high volume at the absolute extreme. Okay, so that would be the high volume people. And they believe, and I'm not saying rightly or wrongly, really, I'm not covering that so much as I'm going to cover like where everybody tends to agree, because then we might find some wisdom that can help us. But they believe more is better. They think as long as they're really what we call shotgunning their muscle groups, that means obviously shooting in a general direction and do just a ton of stuff, that good things will happen. So that's one camp in the fitness world. The next camp is what we call the HIIT people, or the high intensity people, not to be confused with HIIT, which is kind of a new term in the last decade or so. And HIIT stands for high intensity interval training. But the original was HIT, and that stood for high intensity training. Dorian Yates was one of them, Mike and Ray Menser, Ellington Darden, to an extent Wayne Westcott. They were more of the HIIT variety people. So they believe in the polar opposite of what the high volume people believe. The HIIT people believe that it comes down to intensity, and the intensity is how you grow muscles. And they believe that too much volume is going to be counterproductive because it's going to cut into your recovery. And they will do something like 1 set or maybe 2 sets per muscle group, and maybe as high as 3 sets if they're doing multiple exercises, but that's for the entire muscle group, not the entire exercise. And they believe in putting intensity on the premium, meaning how hard can you work during a single set, going to momentary muscular failure or volitional fatigue. That would be the emphasis. They believe in doing full body workouts versus splitting it up because they don't feel you need to split it up. They believe that more is not better, and they will do a full body workout 2 to 3 times per week. They will do roughly 10 exercises or so per workout, and they will do a single set most of the time per exercise. So they're the high intensity people. So as you can see, that's a pretty huge shift from one philosophy to the other. And what's funny is there's really research to back up both sides. Now, I'm an exercise physiologist. I've studied a lot of research, and I can tell you right now, research can easily be manipulated to get what you want to get. So you really have to look at peer review studies, meaning that different studies that have been done, that people that are qualified to review these studies and look them over. So there's a lot to it. But I can say in both peer-reviewed articles, both sides have a lot of quality information and quality studies to prove their points. So then it leaves people wondering, well, what's the truth? And as I often say, well, probably both. I mean, why do we have to pick something and generalize it that is true for everybody? But again, that's not the point. Let's talk about what they both say. Let's land on what they both say. All right? Because if they both agree on something, then there has to be something to that something, right? So one area that I will never, ever, ever hear either side, and when I'm talking about either side, I'm talking about people who are reputable enough to be writing workouts and writing books and things of that nature, not just, old Jimmy or Johnny at the gym, but people that really know what they're talking about. So that's what I mean by what they both say. So you're never going to hear any of them preaching crappy form. Never. I mean, the high volume people, and I'll put Arnold Schwarzenegger in that camp, who I really, really like. He's one of my favorite fitness people that speaks. He does not have a formal education in physiology, but he has a ton of experience. And most importantly, he has a ton of passion. And when he talks about fitness, it's always very positive. So, but he's definitely a high volume guy. He, was the king of it. I mean, not only did he do a split routine, he actually worked out 2 times per day back in the day. He would do something like chest in the morning and do 20 sets for chest. And then he would do back at night and do 20 sets for back. And then the next day he would do shoulders in the morning. And then he would do arms at night. And then the next day, he typically would do legs in the morning and then calves and abs at night. So he did a lot of volume. So he's a high volume guy. You're never, ever, ever going to hear him tell somebody to use poor form. In fact, as I already talked about on a podcast this week, he was emphasizing the importance of squeezing the muscles at the top and really contracting them fully, and then stretching them out, lengthening them during the eccentric phase of the motion. And he has always preached that since the time I started following him. And if you go back and watch his very, very funny and also insightful documentary, Pumping Iron, you will see how he always emphasized that. So he always put the emphasis on form. And he always talked about mind to muscle. He says it all the time. And when he was working out, he used what we now in psychology call bizarre imagery, which means he would use like funny imagery to think about his muscle groups. So he used to think of his shoulders as giant cannonballs on top of his traps, basically. That's how he would visualize them as he was working his shoulders. So he always used bizarre imagery. So he would always focus on the feel and the look. So form was of total importance to him. Then if we go to the other camp and we start to look at some of the other guys like Ellington Darden and the Menser brothers, and then Arthur Jones, who developed Nautilus, they are in the high intensity camp, and same thing. They always pushed good form. They might have pushed it harder than the volume guys. I mean, that would make sense a little bit. If you're going to do less, you better get the most out of less that you can. But both sides pushed form, but they always pushed form. I mean, that's when I first started hearing more about pausing and squeezing and holding for a count of 1. They talk about actually putting a time to your tempo of the movement. So for example, they talk about a 4-second concentric, which is the shortening portion of the muscle, which you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then squeeze. And then the eccentric would be 6-second count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a slower repetition compared to just banging them out because the emphasis was put on form. All right. So both camps agree on form. So when we're arguing all the time about what is the best way to work out, maybe we should go to what all the experts say and say that it's absolutely, number 1 is form. So that's one lesson we can get. I'm sure there's others in the world of strength training, but I'm going to move away from that a little bit because I want you, the whole point of this podcast today is to start thinking about where the experts agree, because you're going to find disagreement everywhere. But let's think about where they agree. And if there's commonalities in that, then maybe there's something we can take from that. So now let's move to the world of nutrition, because you also have 2 severe dichotomies, right? You have the low carb, or, now I guess they're the ketogenic folks. And in the old days, it used to be the Atkins and people that basically believe in almost eating 0 carbohydrates, and they count every carb gram. Their claim is that it doesn't matter about calories. It only matters about carbohydrates. So they don't believe in eating any carbs, and they believe in eating, depending on which one you follow, it could either be higher fat or higher protein, but essentially they demonize the carbohydrates. So there is that camp. And then on the polar opposite end of it, which is kind of led more by the American Heart Association and maybe to an extent the American Diabetes Association, but then also endurance athletes, runners, cyclists, swimmers, triathletes are more of the high carb individual people that believe in eating carbohydrates and believe in keeping fat to a minimum and only eating moderate amount of protein. So once again, you have 2 complete dichotomies, and you're going to have 2 camps that really seem like they know what they're talking about, because just like the strength training, there are enough articles to kind of prove one side versus the other. And it really just depends on which magazines that you're reading. Some of them are going to slant one way and some are going to slant the other way. It's kind of like if you're watching your evening news, it's going to be, if one event happens in the world and MSNBC covers it one way and Fox News covers it a different way. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, I thought this happened, and it's going to be very hard to figure out exactly what happened because there's going to be a slant, right? And they're going to seem like both sides are extremely believable. They have articulate people that are explaining the cases, and it seems like they really know what they're talking about. Well, it's the same thing in the diet world. You're going to have people that have done some studies, although maybe not completely peer-reviewed studies, but have done some studies to show one side versus the other. And it's going to really make you think, well, what the heck is going on? How can this dietitian over here that has a degree from so-and-so say I should be eating higher carbohydrates and lower fat? And then how can this dietitian over here who studied at the same university be telling me I should be limiting my carbohydrates and eating more fat? And how can these both really work within my life? And the answer is it just depends on their slant and how they take it. So again, I definitely have more of an opinion on which way to go on that, but that's not the point of this podcast. What do both camps agree on? What do you think both camps agree on? I can think of one thing both camps agree on: no junk food, right? So when you really get down to it, they both agree on that. And when you consider what junk food is, I guess you'd have to call it more processed foods. So the keto people and the paleo people, they're sort of in the same camp, although I think the paleo people believe in eating more protein, less fat off the land, so to say. And the keto people just absolutely believe that carbs are the enemy, no matter what source they came from. They're going to say don't eat junk food, right? I mean, they're not going to say go ahead and just eat all the Fritos you want and Doritos you want and pastries you want and stuff like that. Now, they may say go ahead and eat bacon. I mean, some of the camps say that, where I would call that complete junk food. So, but they definitely say don't eat processed junk food, right? Well, then you move over to the low fat, high carb people, and sometimes people don't understand what they're trying to say because they're saying eat more carbohydrates, eat less fat. Now, again, I tend to agree more with that for sure. But again, that's not the point of this. What they never say, though, I mean, maybe some people do, but again, we're not talking about your buddy at the gym who's telling you how to eat. We're talking about doctors and nurses and dietitians and nutritionists who, might be writing books on how to eat. That's who I'm talking about. They're not going to tell you that a bag of baked Lay's is the same thing as eating a sweet potato. They're not going to tell you that. You may hear that, but they're never going to say that. So when they're saying eat a higher percentage of carbohydrates, that's what they mean. They mean whole food carbohydrates. They mean sweet potatoes. They mean white potatoes. They mean wild rice. They mean beans, legumes. They mean whole wheat. And even that can be a little sketchy as far as opinions and stuff on that goes. But they absolutely mean don't eat junk food, right? And how many times through the years have you believed that? I mean, really, when you get down to it, I mean, every time I see somebody post their weight loss journey, on social media, or like they've lost some weight and you ask them how they did it, that's the first thing I always hear them say. They say they quit eating the junk. So if we can just kind of like forget about the stupid arguments of whether or not we should be ketogenic or whether or not we should eat more plants and more carbohydrates and just tell ourselves, well, wait a minute. Both camps agree not to eat junk food. So if these guys are both throwing rocks at the same target, then maybe that target is the thing that needs to be taken out, right? Because you got two polar opposite views, two mortal enemies in the health and fitness world agreeing that junk food is the enemy, right? And I will absolutely agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying never eat it. I'm saying it's the enemy. I mean, meaning that, if you're one of those people that is pretty disciplined and then says, but once a week I have to have a little piece of pumpkin pie or something like that, and I just get a little sliver and it works for me, great. I mean, that's fine. If it works for you, it works for you. But just understanding that it might be the junk food that we can absolutely eliminate and everybody is agreeing upon. The new farming, the new processing of foods is really starting to hit the headlines as a big problem in this country. And I like that. We're starting to realize that all of this industrialized food and crap that we're producing out there that people are eating, and mostly eating because it's cheap and it's made to be cheap. It's made to sell. It's made to sell fast. It stays on your grocery stores forever, which is good for the people that produce it that are trying to make profits. And then it's good for the people who are on a limited budget because it's actually cheaper. So that's a win-win for the old, capitalistic person out there. But that's not a win-win for your health. That's a lose-lose. So if we can just say, all right, so I'm going to cut the junk out. All right. So take this style of thinking to other areas of health and fitness this week. Where does everybody agree? All right. So I had a person here that was just finishing working out. And I was kind of throwing around some ideas for topics. And And then I decided I wanted to go this direction because I've been thinking about it. But, they said, hydration. It's like, oh, okay. So, but everybody agrees on that, right? I mean, I've yet to run into one person that says, I don't need to be hydrated. I want to be like a cactus. I'm not going to take in anything. I'm just going to hold it. Like, nobody thinks that we don't need more hydration. So we agree on that, right? But again, here's an area where there's all these different views. I used to know a person that used to tell people to drink 2.5 gallons of water a day. And they said it with a straight face. 2.5 gallons of water a day. I mean, if that's me, I am peeing all day long. That's not going to work out very well. Then, of course, we have our old school advice that we used to get told in school, grammar school, growing up, at least in my area, 8 glasses of water a day. And then the government moved it to 11 glasses of water a day for men and 9 glasses for women. That's kind of funny, isn't it? I mean, what a silly generalization. To this day, I can still remember the photos in the textbook of what it looked like, 9 versus 11. It's like, ooh, man, I see this huge difference. So again, it depends on body weight. So we all know we should hydrate. I hope we all know that. But everybody's got a different view of how much. And again, I'm not going to get over it. I'm really just wrapping this up by giving you another example to think about. So what does everybody agree on? Everybody agrees you need to hydrate, right? So how much? Well, I mean, we'll figure that out, right? But everybody agrees that we do need to stay hydrated. And like everything, it's going to come down to what works best for you. And we have to sometimes get away from these great generalizations, right? So that's what I want you to think about. And if you're listening to this, send me a text, send me an email, Facebook me, and give me other examples of what I'm talking about here. I'd like to hear at least one more example of where everybody agrees, where we can find common ground and actually kind of build a camp on it. Can you imagine if our politicians did that? What a better world we'd live in, instead of like fighting their sides all the time. But if they actually picked something that they kind of both remotely agree on and said, all right, let's at least do this, I think we'd be moving in the right direction. And speaking of moving in the right direction, you always have to keep your spine moving in the right direction. So I want to thank chiropractic physician Dr. Doris Antos of Ormond Beach, Florida. She has her office on Granada Boulevard, and she is a graduate of Palmer College right here in Port Orange, which makes her a consummate professional. And remember, you don't need to get chiropractic and massages just when something goes wrong. It's a good idea to keep it in your main staple of health and fitness. So if you're interested, I will put her information in the show notes. Until next time, be max fit, be max well.